Clarice had not lit the fire in 3 days, not since the tiny grave behind her cabin swallowed what little was left of her soul. The baby she had carried for 9 aching months had arrived too early and breathed too little. And now the cradle sat empty, the cabin quiet, and her breasts ached with milk that no longer had a name to call it. She moved like a ghost, hands trembling as she folded the same cloth over and over, unaware that the snow outside had deepened, unaware of anything except the silence that screamed at her. So when the knock came, soft, almost unsure, she didn't rise at first. No one came here, not anymore. The second knock was firmer, and something inside her, perhaps habit, perhaps duty, made her feet move. She opened the door slowly, expecting wind or animal. Instead, there stood a man like carved obsidian, tall, fierce, wild, with braids that brushed his shoulders and eyes that burned despite the cold. In his arms, wrapped in doe skin and sweat, lay a baby so small, so quiet, it might have been mistaken for dead. But it wasn't. The infant's chest moved faintly, and the man, whose face was painted with desperation more than war, fell to his knees before her. "Please," he said in a voice thick with fear, "feed my son, or he will die." Clarice didn't understand at first. Her grief was still too loud. "What?" she managed, clutching the doorframe. "I'm no healer." The man didn't rise. "He needs milk. His mother passed during birth. There's no other woman among us. They said the white woman here had a child." Her throat clenched, her arms crossed over her chest. "She died too," she whispered, and for a moment they both simply knelt, him in snow, her in doorway, 2 broken people clinging to ghosts. Then the baby whimpered. It was barely a sound, but it struck her like lightning. Her body responded before her mind could argue. She reached forward, hesitated, then took the bundle. The baby was fevered but alive, cheeks flushed, lips dry and cracking. Her milk, painful and unused, pulsed again. Without speaking, she turned and entered the cabin, settling into the rocker by the hearth, tugging at her bodice with mechanical movements. The baby latched the moment her breast touched his mouth. It was as if her son had come back to life. Clarice sobbed soundlessly, rocking slowly while the baby fed, while the Apache warrior waited outside in the snow, not daring to intrude. Minutes passed like hours. The child drank greedily, and Clarice felt her heart begin to thaw in terrifying, beautiful ways. When the baby finally slept, she wrapped him gently and opened the door. The man was still kneeling, eyes closed as if in prayer. "What's his name?" she asked softly. He opened his eyes. Stunned she was speaking. "Sohan," he answered. "It means star." She nodded. "I lost mine 3 nights ago." She handed the child back with aching reluctance. "Come back tomorrow. He'll need more." The warrior rose slowly. "You would do this again?" She looked down at her arms, still warm where the baby had lain. "It hurts less when he's near," she said, "and I think he needs me as much as I needed someone." For the first time, the warrior's mouth softened. "Then we will return with the sun," he said, and turned into the snow. Clarice closed the door, heart thudding, milk still leaking, grief now tangled with something else entirely. Hope. The snow had not let up overnight, yet Clarice waited by the door before dawn, clutching the blanket that had once been her son's, her eyes scanning the white horizon like it might deliver both sorrow and salvation at once. Every part of her body ached from memory, the soft weight of her child, the helplessness of loss, but also from something new, something fierce and unfamiliar. Purpose. She did not know the Apache's name, only the baby's, Sohan, and yet when a silhouette finally emerged through the flurries, Tall and sure-footed with that fragile bundle in his arms, she exhaled, as if holding her breath for a lifetime. The man didn't knock this time. He stopped at her steps and waited. Clarisse opened the door before he could call out. She didn't smile. Grief still kept her lips stiff, but her eyes softened, and that was enough. "Come inside," she said simply. The warrior stepped into the cabin, careful not to track too much snow onto her worn rug. Sohan was awake this time, making soft noises of discontent, his tiny fists clenching against cold. Clarisse took him without a word, sitting again in her rocker, positioning herself as before. The child latched quickly, his cries muffled into silence. "He remembered," she murmured. "He knew where to go." The warrior remained standing by the wall, arms folded as if holding back the entire world. "He is strong," he said, "like his mother." Clarisse hesitated, then asked, "Did you love her?" It wasn't nosy, just gentle, an offering of shared pain, the man's brow furrowed. "She was chosen for me. We had few words, but..." She sang to him before she bled out. Her voice was soft. "I think... he knows it's gone." Clarisse looked down at the boy, tears threatening again. "Babies know," she said, "even when no one tells them." They stayed like that. Woman nursing a stranger's child, man watching the ghost of a wife in the hands of a grieving widow, until Sohan finished and drifted into sleep. Clarisse didn't give him back right away. She rocked longer this time, breathing in the warmth of him. "What's your name?" she asked finally. The warrior hesitated. "Kahok." "I'm Clarisse," she offered. "My husband died in the mines. My daughter came too early. She couldn't breathe right." Kahok nodded slowly. "You were alone." "I still am," she said, then corrected herself. "I was." Kahok stepped forward cautiously. "They will not. Like this, Clarisse. My people. A white woman feeding an Apache child." "And yours?" she asked. "The white folks?" Clarisse's smile was bitter now. "They already think I've gone mad. Talking to ghosts, letting milk waste on stone." She finally stood and handed Sohan back, but not before pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. Kahok accepted him, like one might take a sacred object. "I'll come again tomorrow," he said, if you'll let me." "Don't wait for permission," Clarisse replied. "He needs it, and I think I do too." Kahok stared at her a moment longer, then stepped out into the snow again, his long figure soon swallowed by white. Clarisse stood at the door even after he vanished, pressing her hand to her chest, feeling a sting of warmth that no fire had given. Something had changed. Not healed, but shifted. The cradle didn't look as empty now. Her arms, though still grieving, were no longer hollow. And tomorrow, when Sohan returned, she knew she would be waiting with more than milk. She would be waiting with heart. By the fourth day, Clarisse noticed the footprints in the snow before Kahok even arrived. 2 sets, larger than his, leading halfway to her cabin before veering off into the woods. She stared at them for a long time, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing they had been seen. Her town had long stopped visiting her after the burial, whispers growing like mold around her porch. They called her cursed, said the land rejected her, said God had already taken what he needed. But now, something else was stirring. New whispers, sharpened by prejudice. When Kahok appeared on the horizon, she held the baby tighter, stepping out to meet him before he reached the cabin. "Someone's been watching," she said plainly. Kahok's eyes scanned the tree line, unreadable. "From your town?" "Yes," she replied. "Or maybe from yours. Doesn't matter. It's starting." Kahok lowered his gaze to Sohan, then met her eyes. "I will not put you in danger." "You already did," she said, but without anger. So did he. She gestured to the baby nestled against her breast. But I chose to open the door. I chose to feed him. Kahok stood silent, snow swirling around his boots, jaw tight with the kind of helpless fury that only men who've buried too many things can carry. Clarice softened. Come inside. We'll feed him, then talk. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low. Clarice had added a second chair near the rocker, one she'd scrubbed clean and cushioned with a folded quilt. Kahok hesitated, then took the seat without a word. Sohon drank eagerly, and Clarice, though aching, let her body answer his hunger. It was no longer just an act of charity. It was rhythm, a strange new dance between grief and grace. The village elders have heard, Kahok said quietly. Some say it is a shameful thing. They say I am soft, that I dishonor my blood. And mine say I've taken a wild beast into my home, she answered. Funny how both sides think they're defending something sacred. Would you send him away? Kahok asked. If they told you to stop? Clarice looked down at the baby, his tiny fingers gripping the edge of her blouse as if anchoring himself to life. He reminds me that I'm still alive, she said. He reminds me I'm still useful. You don't send away something that does that. Kahok bowed his head. Then I will bring him still, even if I must come by night. She glanced at him. And if they come here, with fire in their eyes? Then I will wait at your steps, he said, with fire in mine. That night, after he left and the snow covered his tracks, Clarice didn't sleep. She sat by the fire holding the blanket she'd used to wrap her daughter, now warming Sohon instead. Outside, wolves howled faintly in the hills, but she did not fear them. It was the people she feared now, their eyes, their judgment, their cruel grip on what was right. Yet, as the flames danced against the walls, Clarice felt something growing stronger than fear, a stubborn love, a slow, defiant light. She would not abandon this child, and if that meant defying two worlds, then so be it. Her grief had made her hollow, but this need, this shared hunger between her and Sohon, was filling her again. And when she looked at the cradle and saw it rocking slightly on its own, she did not cry this time. She simply whispered, "Sleep, little star," and sat watching until morning. Clarice woke before dawn to the sound of twigs snapping outside. She stiffened in her bed, instinctively drawing the covers over Sohon, who slept curled against her side. She didn't breathe, didn't blink, until the sound passed. It wasn't Kahok. His steps were soft, measured, and respectful. This was heavier, hesitant, watching. When the sun finally spilled light through the chinks in the shutters, she rose and opened the door slowly. A mark had been carved into the tree near her porch, 3 vertical lines slashed through with a crooked X. She didn't need a sermon to know what it meant. Unclean. Watched. Warned. Her people didn't send letters. They sent symbols. She stared at it for a long while, then fetched the kettle. The fire in her stove burned hotter than ever. Later, Kahok arrived with no words, only the weight of his silence. She showed him the mark. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer comfort. He simply took a knife from his belt and scratched a new symbol just below it, a single circle crossed by 2 feathers. "What does it mean?" she asked, arms crossed. "Protected," he said. "Claimed by more than fear." She blinked. "Your people?" "No. Me." Clarice turned to go back inside, hiding the way her breath caught. Sohon had begun to fuss again, and without a thought, she lifted him to her chest. Her blouse was stained. Now, her body giving milk without ceremony, without hesitation. Kahok watched as she moved. "Your strength is strange," he said quietly. "It isn't loud." She chuckled. "It used to be, before the silence came." "You fear the judgment of others?" "I fear how it might fall on him." She nodded toward the baby. "I already lost one. I can't lose another." Kahok stepped forward, surprising her. "I do not come only to feed him," he said. "You should know this." "Then why come?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Because every day I see a woman who gives life even when hers has been broken. And I see a child who is becoming mine, without blood, without asking." She turned away, cheeks flushed. "Don't say things like that," she muttered. "Why not?" "Because they make me hope," she whispered. "And I don't know if I can survive another loss." Kahok didn't move closer, but his voice came steady. "I will not leave unless you tell me to. What if they come for me? Then they will come for me too." That night, after he left, Clarice knelt by the hearth, holding Sohon to her breast, watching the milk soak into his lips and disappear like snow into fire. She whispered stories to him. Not nursery rhymes, but memories. "Your mother's name was Maika," she told him. "I didn't know her, but I imagined she laughed with her eyes." Sohon cooed softly, a warm weight against her. "And your name means star. But you didn't fall from the sky. You were handed to me, like a second chance." Outside, the carved marks still glowed faintly in moonlight, warning and protection side by side, just like the truths Clarice now lived with. She was no longer grieving alone. She was grieving forward, breastfeeding not just a baby, but a story neither tribe would dare tell. And when she lay in bed again, the fire low, she whispered into the dark, "Let them come. We have fire, we have milk, we have names." Her hand rested over Sohon's chest. His heartbeat pulsed strong beneath her palm, and for the first time since her daughter's death, Clarice did not dream of graves. By the time the fifth sunrise arrived, Clarice could feel it in her bones. An invisible wind curling through the trees, not cold but cautious, like the forest itself had begun to whisper her name. Kahok hadn't returned that morning, and though Sohon still suckled from her breast with the same trustful hunger, she felt the shift like a tremor beneath her floorboards. It began with the silence of birds. Then came the first visitor. A woman in dark braids and bone earrings stood at the edge of the clearing, arms folded, eyes narrowed. She didn't speak. She only watched. Clarice met her gaze through the window, heart hammering as she rocked Sohon back to sleep, refusing to let her hands tremble. When she stepped out later to gather water from the creek, the woman was gone. But 3 more appeared by, dusk, lingering near the pines, speaking in low tones, their backs always turned just enough to suggest disdain. Kahok arrived that evening with his shoulders stiff and eyes shadowed. "They've heard," he said. "They've seen." Clarice didn't ask who they were. She already knew. She fed the child in front of him that night, defiantly baring her shoulder as if to say, "This is no shame." Kahok sat by the fire and told her the names of those who had seen. His aunt, a hunter, 2 widows who lost their sons in raids. "They say I have brought a curse to the child," he said, "that to drink from the body of a foreign widow is to grow soft, twisted." Clarice snorted bitterly. "Because softness is such a danger." "In war," Kahok said, "it is." "But is this war?" she asked. Kahok looked at her for a long time before shaking his head. "No. This is something no one knows how to name." That night the wind returned, not from the north or east, but from within. Clarice lay awake beside Sohon and watched the fire until her eyes burned. She remembered her husband's funeral, how no one had come except the preacher and one kind rancher. She remembered how her baby girl had turned cold in her arms before sunrise, And now she remembered how this child, this son, warmed her chest with each sip, as if reminding her breath by breath that she still belonged to something sacred. She didn't see herself as brave. She didn't even see herself as good. But she knew, with the ferocity of fire, that she would not stop feeding him, no matter who watched, whispered, or threatened. In the dead of night, a knock came. Soft, 3 times. Kahok. She opened the door with Sohon still sleeping in her arms. "They will meet tomorrow," he said, "the ones who speak loudest, the ones who carry sway." "To decide what?" she asked. "Whether you remain," he replied. Clarice didn't blink. "I have nowhere else." Kahok's jaw tensed. "Then we prepare. For eyes, for judgment. And if they ask me to stop?" Kahok stepped forward until their shadows touched. "Then you will not stand alone." As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Will they listen?" He paused, then said, "They might not listen to a woman, but they will listen to a mother." As the door closed behind him, Clarice looked down at Sohon. He stirred, lips puckering as if still dreaming of her milk. "Then they'll listen," she whispered, "because I am both." The clearing behind Kahok's lodge had been used for years as a place of judgment, first for the tribe's hunters, then for its traitors, and now, it seemed, for her. Clarice stood just outside the fire's reach, Sohon bundled tight against her chest, his weight both a comfort and a shield. The flames threw strange shadows across the assembled faces. Old warriors with paint still faint on their cheeks, widows whose eyes burned with grief, and a younger woman with fists clenched at her sides, the same one who had watched Clarice days before from the trees. Kahok stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt the heat of his resolve. The elder, a wiry man with scars etched into his throat like a torn map, raised a carved staff and struck the ground once. "This gathering is for the matter of the child, and the milk that is not ours," he said. Murmurs flickered like wind through dry leaves. Clarice felt her knees wobble but locked them tight. Kahok stepped forward first. "My wife died giving birth," he said, voice level. "No woman among us would take the child. I searched, I begged. Then I found the one who did not turn her face from him." All eyes turned to her. The elder pointed his staff. "You speak, widow?" Clarice inhaled and stepped forward, making sure the fire touched her face. "I buried my child days before he brought Sohon. My body still carried milk. I did not do it to offend your ways. I did it because he would have died, and I could not stand another grave." The silence afterward was total. Even the crackle of fire seemed to hush itself. One woman spat in the dirt. "You steal a child's spirit with milk not of his people," she hissed. "You make him weak." Clarice met her glare. "I make him live." The woman took a step forward. "He will forget us, forget his tongue. You will turn him soft." "If living is softness," Clarice said, "then softness saved him." A few heads turned. Kahok's jaw twitched, but he remained still. The elder nodded slowly. "The child has drank. What is done cannot be undone, but we must decide if it shall continue." The air was thick now, pulsing. Kahok looked to the elder. "Then hear one more voice." And to everyone's surprise, he motioned to a figure at the edge of the firelight. An old woman stepped forward, bent-backed, eyes like coals. Clarice had not seen her before. "I lost 5 sons in war," she said softly. "Hardness did not save them, and once when my own milk dried, a white woman nursed my last child. She did not take his soul. She gave him days. Days we used to say goodbye." Her words struck like thunder without sound. The angry woman faltered. The fire hissed louder. The elder leaned on his staff. "Then let her stay. Let the child drink. But she will be watched." Clarice exhaled, not from relief, but from understanding. Watched was better than banished. She nodded once. "Watch all you want," she said. "He will live." As the fire dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Kahok turned to her, his voice lower than before. "I was not sure they would listen." Clarice smiled, brushing soot from Sohon's brow. "They didn't, but a mother did. And sometimes, that's enough." Clarice had hoped for peace, or at least space to breathe after the fire gathering, but the days that followed were lined with eyes. Judging, waiting, whispering. She carried Sohon with her, everywhere, not only because he cried when left, but because she didn't trust the silence behind her back. Some began calling him milk thief, not to his face, but loud enough that even a baby might feel the weight of it. Kahok offered to take him on hunting trips, to give her rest. But she refused. "He came to me hungry," she said once, tightening the sling around her shoulder, "and I won't hand him back to cold air." The only time she let go was near the river, where the trees sang loud enough to mask her fear, and the current whispered truths no tribe could deny. She often sat on a stone with Sohon asleep against her chest, her feet bare in the mud. That's where she saw the rope. Thick, sun-bleached, dangling from a tree just upstream, knotted at the end like a noose that had been forgotten. It hadn't been there before. She rose, heart racing, and traced it back to the branch. Someone had tied it there recently. Not for a child to swing, not for fishing. A warning. Her blood ran colder than the river. That night, Kahok found her outside the lodge, staring into the fire with soot on her fingers. "Tell me," he said. "The rope," she answered. "It was tied above the water, knotted." He didn't flinch. "A message. To me? To both of us." His hands flexed but didn't reach for his knife. "They won't act in the open, not yet." "But soon?" Clarice whispered. "They might." That night, she didn't sleep. Sohon did, a thumb tucked between his lips, chest rising slow and sweet, but she lay beside him listening for creaks, waiting for footsteps that never came. The next morning the rope was gone. Kahok had cut it, burned it, and left the ash by her door like a vow. Still she walked with her back straight, refusing to cower, though fear gripped her ribs tighter than any sling. She began speaking softly to Sohon as they walked. Stories of her own child, of lullabies and garden beds, and the time she spilled milk on her dress, and laughed for the first time in weeks. And somehow, that quiet became defiance. The same women who once turned their backs now lingered closer, listening. One left a woven toy by her door. Another offered broth. And the woman who had spat at her during the council now looked away, but didn't hiss. Kahok watched it unfold like slow thaw. "You're not soft," he told her one evening. "You bend like the river, but you don't break." Clarice turned to him, brushing a curl from her face. "I don't have the luxury to break." He hesitated. "I know." Then, without asking, he reached out and braided her hair. Simple, patient, the way a brother might, or a man trying to earn the right to be something more. She didn't stop him. The next morning, a new rope hung at the river, but this time it was wound into a cradle, low to the water, swinging gently in the breeze. She placed Sohon in it, stood back, and waited. No one came. But someone had left a single, feather tucked into the branch above, and it trembled like forgiveness. The days turned warm, and the forest turned brighter, but Clarice's fear never fully left. It merely learned how to wear softer shoes. Kahok began hunting farther from the village, returning with smoked meat and scraped knuckles. His silence is heavier but more watchful. She noticed the way he glanced at the cradle now swaying behind their lodge, where Sohon giggled, and clutched at the wind. That rope basket had become more than a place to rest. It was a quiet altar of defiance, a signal to all who watched that she hadn't left and wouldn't. One morning, as she hung herbs to dry, a young girl with a crooked braid appeared at the edge of the trees, holding something wrapped in deerskin. Clarisse straightened, ready for insult or orders, but the girl said nothing, just stepped forward and laid the bundle beside the cradle. Then she vanished. Inside was a talisman, braided red thread wrapped around a carved hawk, wings spread as if in warning. Clarisse knew it instantly. It was a war charm, a gift usually given to warriors returning from battle. She turned it in her palm for a long while, unsure if it was praise or threat. That night, Kahok sat beside her on the woven mat and watched her fingers twist the red thread again and again. "They're waiting for you to break," he said. "They thought a woman with grief would burn fast." "They were wrong," Clarisse whispered. "I don't burn. I feed the fire." He looked at her then, really looked, at the hollowed cheeks that had begun to fill, at the eyes that no longer darted but held their gaze. "You're becoming something they don't have a name for," he said. "Not wife, not mother, not enemy." "Then let them choke on silence," she murmured. The next morning, she tied the red thread into her braid, so it ran through her hair like blood through the scalp. She wore it openly, daring someone to speak. No one did. Sohan had begun to toddle, small, staggering steps that ended in laughter or gentle collapse. One of the older boys from the village began walking beside him, showing him where the roots jutted from the earth, where berries grew sweet, where the hawk nested in the tallest tree. Clarisse watched from the steps of the lodge, arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes never leaving the horizon. When the boy looked up and waved at her, she waved back. That night, Kahok returned with more than meat. He brought a broken flute, its wood cracked and dark with age. "Yours?" she asked. "No. Found it buried in ash. Someone tried to destroy music once." "And?" "I want to fix it. You still sing to him. He deserves more than words." Together they sat in the firelight while Sohan slept between them. Kahok shaved slivers from the broken edges, and Clarisse hummed low, the kind of song meant to stitch bone to skin. The hawk talisman sat above the door, and the red thread in her braid gleamed every time the fire snapped. She didn't know if forgiveness was coming. But she knew this. What began in grief had grown roots, and whatever storm the tribe still held in its throat, it would find her no longer kneeling, but standing, arms wide, child on her hip, heart braided with defiance, and something dangerously close to love. The rain came suddenly, thick and wild, pounding the earth with a fury that made even the trees bow in submission. Clarisse stood outside the lodge, her dress soaked and her braid heavy with the weight of the red thread, but she didn't flinch. Sohan clung to her hip, eyes wide at the sky's tantrum, while Kahok crouched by the fire pit, shielding the embers beneath a hide. The storm wasn't just wind and water. It was a warning. From the edge of the forest came shouting, not in English, but in the sharp, clipped syllables of the tribe's older tongues, words soaked in tradition and heat. Kahok rose slowly, his jaw tight, and looked toward the voices before glancing at her. "They're coming," he said. "All of them." Clarisse didn't ask who. They both knew. The elders, the ones who had never spoken her name aloud. The mothers who looked at Sohan like he was the wrong shade of star. The boys who whispered war chants when she walked by. Kahok stepped forward, his hand brushing her arm as if to steady her. But she didn't move. "No more hiding," she said, shifting Sohan to her other side. "If they want to call me something, let them say it to my face." They came into view like shadows forming from the mist. 12 of them, old and young, feathered cloaks pulled tight, eyes hard. At the front stood a woman with gray hair woven like rope and a necklace of bone that clattered with each step. She stopped 5 feet away. Her eyes flicked to Kahok, then to the child, then to Clarice. "We name what we accept," the woman said. "So far you have no name." Clarice didn't flinch. "Then make one, or walk away." A murmur rippled through the group. Kahok stepped beside her, not in front. She bled for him, nursed him, stayed when she should have run. What else must she do? The elder's eyes narrowed. "We gave you silence. You filled it with flame." Clarice shifted Sohon higher on her hip. "I buried one son, fed another. That doesn't make me yours. It makes me alive." The storm crackled, lightning flashing once in the distance, as if the sky itself paused to listen. The elder woman stepped closer, then reached out, fingers hovering near Clarisse's braid. "Red thread," she murmured. "Blood, war, but also bond." Clarice didn't move. The woman's hand dropped. "We name her Atsika," she said finally. "It means the one who stays in the fire." Another murmur, sharper now, not protest, something like awe. Clarice blinked. "Is that acceptance?" "It's a beginning," the elder replied. "You'll never be what we were born as. But you are something we were not brave enough to be." Then, turning to Kahok, she added, "Raise the child well. He now carries 2 flames in his blood." They turned and left, their silhouettes dissolving back into the trees. The rain softened. Clarice stood still until the storm broke fully, and only mist remained. Kahok turned to her, eyes searching her face. "Atsika," he said, "does it feel like yours?" She looked down at Sohon, then up at the sky. "It feels like the name I've been earning with every breath." And in that moment, even the wind seemed to bow to her, not as an outsider, not as a threat, but as a woman carved from ashes, named by fire, and unshaken by the storm. The smoke curled upward in slow ribbons from the hearth as the winter sun poured through the cracks in the lodge's roof, warming the earth floor where Clarice sat cross-legged, her hands cradling a carved bowl of stew. Sohon sat beside her, mimicking her every move with exaggerated seriousness, his tiny fingers grasping the wooden spoon Kahok had whittled just for him. Across the fire, Kahok worked in silence, braiding a new cord from dyed sinew, his fingers moving with quiet purpose, the way they always did when his thoughts were heavy. Outside, the world had finally gone still, as if the tribe itself held its breath after the storm of judgment had passed. Clarice's braid still bore the red thread, but now it had been joined by a single turquoise bead at the end, a gift from the matriarch who once refused to speak her name. They had not asked her to leave, nor had they asked her to stay. But she remained, and that had become its own kind of answer. Sohon giggled suddenly, sloshing stew over the edge of his bowl, and Kahok looked up, the sternness in his eyes melting instantly. Clarice met his gaze and smiled, small but full, and in that moment, something settled between them. Not a decision, not a vow, but something older and deeper. Kahok set down the cord and reached behind him, pulling forward a small bundle wrapped in deer hide. "I made this for him," he said, unwrapping it to reveal a tiny vest sewn from soft rabbit fur and trimmed in the same red thread Clarice wore. "He carries 2 names now. He should wear them both." Clarice took it with trembling hands, her throat thick. "And what about me?" she asked, not teasing, not doubting, just wondering aloud. Kahok stood and came around the fire to her side. "You carry fire, Clarice. Fire that healed a stranger's child. Fire that stayed through the cold. You're not wearing my name or even theirs. You're wearing your own." She blinked fast but let the tears come, not ashamed anymore to cry in front of him, or the child, or even the tribe if they passed by. "Then let this be our lodge," she whispered. "No signs, no borders, just flame and flesh and memory." Kahok knelt beside her and placed a hand over hers, guiding the vest onto Sohan, who squealed in delight and patted the fur proudly. The child didn't know the weight of what he wore, not yet, but one day he would, and she would be there to tell him. About the day a warrior begged with his whole soul. About the moment a grieving mother answered with her body. About a tribe that watched from the shadows, and a matriarch who whispered a new name into the smoke. About a fire that never asked permission to burn, only needed air. She leaned her head against Kahok's shoulder as the stew bubbled and the boy giggled and the sky outside turned from gray to gold. The lodge was small and still rough around the edges, but it held 2 flames now, one carved from grief, the other from hope, and neither would go out easily. Clarisse closed her eyes, listening to the breath of the boy and the silence of the man beside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel hollow or haunted. She felt whole. And somewhere, in the place where sorrow and mercy meet, a child she had buried was smiling, not lost, but returned in another form. She held Sohan closer and whispered to the fire, "We're home." The fire burned low, throwing a soft orange light across the walls of the lodge as Clarisse traced her fingers around the rim of the wooden bowl in her lap. Not because she was hungry, but because the warmth anchored her. Sohan had finally fallen asleep beside her, curled up beneath the fur vest Kahok had made, his thumb still tucked in his mouth, hair damp with sweat from playing too hard. Kahok had gone outside an hour earlier, saying nothing, just kissing the top of the boy's head and slipping through the flap of hide that covered their door. She hadn't followed, hadn't needed to. The silence between them no longer felt like absence, but trust. Still, she felt the weight of something unfinished. The tribe had not spoken outright since the moment she chose to stay. Some watched her with curiosity, others with cold distance, and a few, like the elder woman with the beadwork gloves, had nodded once or twice when they passed. But Kahok had not spoken of the moment he pleaded for her to nurse the child. He hadn't spoken of what it had done to him, to watch a stranger give life to his only son while the people who shared his blood did nothing. She heard footsteps now, quiet, deliberate, and turned toward the door. Kahok entered carrying 2 long sticks, both still dripping with melted snow, and a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. "Come," he said, not commanding but gently. "I need to show you something." She tucked a blanket over Sohan and followed him out into the sharp night air. The wind had softened since last week's storm, and the snow underfoot no longer crunched but sighed. He led her to the edge of the camp, past the drying racks and tanning hides, to a small clearing just before the frozen creek. There, he drove both sticks into the ground, 2 paces apart, and hung the bundle between them. When he stepped back, she saw what he had made: 2 fire pit holders, shaped to cradle a central flame without wind. "I wanted to build something," he said, "that wouldn't blow out every time the storm returned. Something low but strong." He lit the tinder inside with a spark stone and stepped aside. "This is for us, not a lodge, not a child, just this, something small that stays warm." Clarisse stood in the firelight, heart trembling. "Why?" she whispered. Kahok looked at her, and the flame flickered in his eyes. "Because you didn't run. Because when I begged for my son's life, you didn't ask who he was or what it meant. You just gave. No tribe, No bargain, just fire. Her breath caught. What happens now? She asked. The others still look at me like I don't belong. Kahok shook his head. Belonging isn't given by them anymore. It's chosen. You chose this place, this boy, this life. That's enough. She stepped closer to the fire and held her hands out, letting the warmth soak into her skin. And you? She asked, without looking at him. I've been choosing you since the day I carried him into that hut, he said. I just didn't know how to speak it until now. She turned to him slowly. Then let this flame be ours. He nodded once and reached into his coat, pulling out a red-threaded bracelet. From my mother, he said. She told me to give it only to the woman who would stay even when the fire turned to smoke. Clarice held out her wrist, and he tied it there, hands trembling. The wind passed softly through the trees, but the flame between them did not move. It stayed. And so did she. By morning, the light that crept through the lodge's stitched hide walls was silvered with mist, the kind that spoke of snowmelt and beginnings. Clarice woke slowly, not to the cold or to hunger, but to the steady rhythm of Sohan's breath against her shoulder. He had clung to her all night like he'd never done before, as if something in him had finally learned that mothers could be real and warm and permanent. Kahok had not come in until long after the fire, in the middle of the lodge, burned down to soft embers. But when he did, he laid his weapons by the door, sat beside the boy, and fell asleep without a word. And now, in this quiet hour, they all breathed together like one body, no longer stitched from grief and survival, but sewn by the fire she had once lit for a stranger's child. Clarice moved carefully, slipping from under Sohan's small arm and adjusting the furs to keep him warm. She stepped outside barefoot, her soles pressing gently into the mud-soft earth, and found Kahok already there, tending to something beside the new fire pit he'd built last night. I've been thinking, he said without turning. We can build another lodge, just a bit further off, not too far. One for you, if you still want your own space. She shook her head slowly. No, she said. I don't want distance. I want room, for all three of us. He finally looked at her. Then we'll widen the walls, tear down the ends and start again. She smiled. Good, but I want 2 flames. He raised a brow. 2? Clarice nodded, walking to the fire. 1 where we cook, 1 where we speak. Kahok crouched beside her. And 1 where we remember? She looked at him. We don't need a fire for that. Sohan is that fire. You are. Even I am now. A slow, quiet smile crossed his face, the kind that didn't rise easily in a man used to storms. He pulled from his satchel a small carved bird, no bigger than her palm. He made this, he said. Sohan? He said it's for you. Said he saw you cry once, and birds don't cry unless they've lost their sky. But now he says you're flying again. Her breath caught. He said that? Kahok nodded. He doesn't say much, but when he does, he remembers everything. She took the bird, holding it as reverently as if it were flesh and not wood. Then she turned to Kahok and said, Then let's give him a sky. Together they began gathering wood, calling to one of the elders for cedar sap and twine. She watched as Kahok worked, noticed how his shoulders no longer hunched with the weight of solitude, how his hands moved with certainty, not just in function, but in belonging. Sohan came out eventually, rubbing sleep from his eyes and blinking at the brightness of day. Is this for me? He asked. Clarice walked to him and knelt, brushing hair from his eyes. It's for us, she said, but you'll sleep closest to the warmest flame. Kahok lifted him into his arms then, and for the first time, It wasn't with the desperation of a father clinging to the last piece of a lost wife, but with the quiet strength of a man who had found something new to build, someone to build it with. When the new lodge stood completed by twilight, it held 2 fire pits, one for warmth and one for stories. That night, Clarice set the table and placed 3 bowls. When Kahok handed her the ladle, she smiled and served first the boy, then herself, and finally him. No words were needed. The grief that had once carved holes in their hearts had become hollow spaces now filled with flame, and above them the smoke rose not as signal or sorrow, but as proof. They were home. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you'd seen her nursing that child, would you have stood beside her too? Tell us in the comments.